The ring on Alara's finger had never meant love. It meant survival. It meant another month of food on the table for her younger sister. It meant Marcus wouldn't sell them both to the trading caravans that swept through the outer villages looking for desperate women with no protectors. What Alara didn't know, as she stood in the crowded hall of the Winter Summit with that false gold band cutting into her skin, was that the man watching her from across the room wasn't just another noble looking for entertainment. She didn't know that his wolf had been pacing beneath his skin for 300 years, waiting. She didn't know that in approximately 4 minutes, everything she'd built to protect herself and Lily was about to come crashing down around her. The summit was held once a decade in the neutral territory between the 5 kingdoms, a glittering display of power and politics where alliances were forged and broken over goblets of honeyed wine. Alara had no business being here. She was nothing. A seamstress from the border villages who'd caught the eye of a minor lord with a cruel streak and an obsession he called love. Marcus's hand tightened on her elbow, his fingers digging into the bruise he'd left there 3 days ago. She didn't flinch. She'd learned not to flinch. "Smile," he hissed against her ear, his breath sour with wine. "The Alpha King is here tonight. If I can secure even a moment of his attention, it could mean a seat on the Northern Council." Ilara's gaze swept the hall, searching for the legendary ruler she'd only heard whispers about. They said Kael'Varen had united the 5 wolf kingdoms through sheer force of will. They said he'd killed his own father to stop a genocide. They said he hadn't taken a mate in 3 centuries because no woman had ever made his wolf recognize her. They said a lot of things. Alara had stopped believing in legends the night her parents died and left her with nothing but a 6-year-old sister and a mountain of debt. There! Marcus jerked his chin toward the far end of the hall where a cluster of nobles had gathered like moths around a flame. "I'm going to introduce myself. Stay here. Don't speak to anyone. Don't embarrass me." He released her arm with a final squeeze that promised consequences if she disobeyed, and then he was gone, weaving through the crowd with the desperate energy of a man who'd gambled everything on tonight. Alara let out a slow breath. Her arm throbbed. Her feet ached in the borrowed shoes that were half a size too small. The dress Marcus had bought her, a deep green silk that he said brought out her eyes, felt like a costume, like she was playing pretend at being someone worthy of standing in a room full of wolves who could snap her human spine without breaking a sweat. She made her way toward the far wall, seeking the shadows, seeking invisibility. A server passed with a tray of wine glasses, and she took one just to have something to do with her hands. She wouldn't drink it, couldn't afford to let her guard down, but holding it made her look like she belonged. She found a pillar to lean against and let herself breathe. That's when she felt it. A prickling at the back of her neck. A sudden awareness that made her pulse skip, and her skin flush with heat despite the cool air flowing through the open windows. Someone was watching her. Not the casual glance of a curious noble. This was focused, intent. Predatory in a way that should have terrified her but instead made something deep in her chest hum like a plucked string. She turned, and the world stopped. He stood 20 feet away, having somehow extracted himself from the crowd of nobles that had been clamoring for his attention. Tall didn't begin to describe him. He towered over everyone around him, broad shoulders filling out a black military jacket adorned with silver insignias she didn't recognize. His hair was dark, almost black, pushed back from a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by an artist who understood that true beauty required edges. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, and eyes the color of molten amber that were locked onto her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. The Alpha King. Kael'Varen was staring at her like she was the only person in the room, like she was the only person in the world. No. Alara tore her gaze away, her heart hammering against her ribs. No, this wasn't possible. She was nobody. She was less than nobody. There was no reason for a king to look at her like that, like he'd been searching for her his entire life, and had finally found her. She needed to move. She needed to disappear into the crowd before Marcus noticed, before anyone noticed, before whatever strange malfunction in the universe had drawn the Alpha King's attention corrected itself, and she found herself explaining to a room full of wolves why she'd dared to meet his eyes. She took one step, then another. Don't. The word was low, rough, and it came from directly behind her. She hadn't heard him move, hadn't sensed him approach. But suddenly he was there, so close she could feel the heat radiating off his body, could smell cedar and wood smoke and something wild that made her wolf brain want to bare her throat in submission. But she didn't have a wolf. She was human, fragile, breakable. She turned slowly, tilting her head back to meet those burning amber eyes. Up close, he was even more devastating. A thin scar ran through his left eyebrow. His lips were pressed into a hard line. And there was something in his expression that looked almost like pain. "Your Majesty," she managed, remembering to curtsy only after the words left her mouth. "I apologize if I've given offense." "You haven't." He studied her face like he was memorizing every detail. "What's your name?" "Elara." She shouldn't have answered so quickly. Should have deflected, redirected, asked him why he wanted to know. But something about his presence made it impossible to do anything but tell the truth. "Elara," he said it slowly, tasting the syllables. "Who brought you here tonight?" Before we continue, please take 2 seconds to like this video. It tells me you want more stories like this. Elara's fingers tightened on her wine glass. This was dangerous. Every instinct she'd developed over years of surviving told her to run, but she couldn't seem to make her feet move. "My betrothed, Lord Marcus Vane." Something flickered in the Alpha King's eyes, something dark and violent that made her take an involuntary step backward. His hand shot out, catching her wrist with a gentleness that contradicted the fury building in his expression. "You're engaged," he said flatly. "Yes." She tried to pull her hand back. He didn't let go. "Your Majesty, please, he'll see." "Let him see." "You don't understand." Her voice cracked. "He's not a kind man. If he thinks I've attracted your attention, he'll punish me. And if he can't punish me, he'll punish my sister. She's 12. She's all I have." The Alpha King went very still. His thumb traced over her pulse point, feeling the rabbiting beat of her heart. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Has he hurt you?" Elara didn't answer. She didn't have to. The slight flinch when his grip shifted toward her bruised elbow told him everything. The sound that came from his chest wasn't human. It was a growl, low and deadly. The sound of a predator scenting blood. Before she could react, he'd lifted her hand, his gaze fixed on the cheap gold band encircling her finger. "This ring," he said. "Did he give it to you?" "Yes." "Do you love him?" A bitter laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "Love has never been part of the arrangement, Your Majesty. He bought my debt. The ring is a collar, not a promise." Kyle's eyes lifted to meet hers, and what she saw there stole the breath from her lungs. Rage, yes, but beneath it, something raw and aching. Recognition. "You're her," he breathed. 300 years. 300 years of searching, of waiting, of watching every woman who crossed my path hoping my wolf would finally wake up. And you were here all along, sold to a monster, wearing his brand like a prisoner. "I don't understand." Her voice shook. "What are you talking about? I'm human. I'm nobody. You're my mate." He said it like it was the simplest truth in the world, like it wasn't a bomb that just detonated in the center of her chest. "My wolf knew the moment you walked into this room. That's why I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at you like a fool. You're mine, Elara. You've always been mine." "No." She shook her head, finally managing to pull her hand free. "No, that's not possible. Mates are wolves, both of them. I don't have a wolf. I'm just a human girl who sews dresses and can't afford to buy bread some weeks. You've made a mistake. The bond doesn't lie. He reached for her again, and this time when his fingers brushed her cheek, she felt it. A golden thread of warmth that hummed to life beneath her skin, wrapping around her heart, connecting her to him in a way that defied explanation. Her eyes went wide. He watched her feel it with something like reverence on his hard features. You sense it now, don't you? She did. God help her, she did. Ilara! Marcus's voice cut through the crowd like a blade, sharp with barely contained fury. He was pushing through the nobles, his face flushed red, his eyes fixed on where she stood with the Alpha King. What do you think you're doing? Get away from him immediately. She flinched. It was automatic, instinctive, her body bracing for impact before her mind caught up. And she watched Cale's expression transform from wonder to ice-cold murder. He stepped in front of her, putting his body between her and the approaching lord. When he spoke, his voice carried through the hall with the authority of a man who had never once been disobeyed. Lord Vane. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Conversations died. Every eye turned toward them. I was just having a conversation with your, what did you call her? Betrothed? Marcus stuttered to a stop, his bravado crumbling as he realized exactly who he'd just challenged. Your Majesty, I apologize. I didn't realize. She knows better than to bother people of importance. I'll take her home immediately and ensure she's properly disciplined. The growl that rumbled through Cale's chest made several nearby nobles take steps backward. Properly disciplined, he repeated, each word dripping with venom. Tell me, Lord Vane, is that what you call the bruises on her arm? Proper discipline? The blood drained from Marcus's face. I don't know what she's told you, but women lie, Your Majesty. They exaggerate. Whatever marks she has, she earned through her own clumsiness. Fascinating. Cale's smile was a terrible thing, all sharp edges and promised violence. Because my wolf is telling me something very different. My wolf is telling me that you've touched what's mine, that you've hurt her, that you've caged her with debt and fear, and called it marriage. Yours? Marcus sputtered. She's not yours. She's wearing my ring. She's bound to me by contract. Is she? Kyle turned slightly, holding out his hand to Ilara. May I see it? The ring? She hesitated. Everything in her screamed that this was a trap, that nothing good ever happened to girls like her, that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. But the golden thread hummed between them, urging her forward. She placed her hand in his. His touch was warm, steady. Safe in a way, nothing had ever been safe. He lifted her hand, examining the cheap gold band that had felt like a shackle for 6 months. Then, with deliberate slowness, he gripped the ring between his thumb and forefinger. I'm taken, she whispered. One last desperate attempt to protect herself, to protect Lily, to prevent the catastrophe she could feel building like a storm on the horizon. She held up her hand, letting the ring catch the light. See? I'm taken. Kyle met her eyes, and then, without breaking her gaze, he pulled the ring off her finger. Not anymore. The gasp that swept through the hall was audible. Marcus made a strangled sound of outrage, stepping forward with his hand raised like he intended to grab her. He never got the chance. Cale moved so fast she barely saw it. One moment Marcus was reaching for her. The next, he was on his knees with the Alpha King's hand wrapped around his throat, claws extended just enough to dimple the skin. You sold her for a debt, Cale said, his voice terrifyingly calm. How much? Marcus wheezed, his eyes bulging. 2,000 gold. 2,000 gold. Cale laughed, but there was no humor in it. You tried to buy my mate for 2,000 gold. You touched her, bruised her, frightened her, and you thought a piece of paper and a cheap ring would protect you. I didn't know, Marcus gasped. How could I have known? She's human. She's nothing. The snarl that ripped from Cale's throat made Ilara's knees go weak. She is everything. She is the queen your pathetic bloodline will kneel to for the next 1,000 years. And if you ever speak of her again, if you so much as look in her direction, I will tear out your throat and feed it to your own hounds." He released Marcus, letting the man crumple to the marble floor in a gasping heap. Then he turned to face the watching crowd, his arm reaching back to pull Alara against his side in a gesture that was half protective, half possessive. "The woman beside me is Alara," he announced, his voice ringing through the silent hall. "My fated mate and your future queen. The false betrothal she was trapped in is dissolved. Any debts held against her are hereby transferred to the crown and considered paid in full. Anyone who attempts to harm her, threaten her, or separate her from me will be treated as an enemy of the throne." His amber eyes swept the crowd with deadly intent. "Am I understood?" The response was immediate. Nobles dropped to their knees. Lords and ladies bowed their heads. Even the servants pressed themselves against the walls in deference. Alara stood frozen at the Alpha King's side, her mind reeling, her heart pounding, that golden thread singing between them like a living thing. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to girls from border villages who couldn't afford medicine when their sisters got sick. Kale looked down at her, and some of the hardness melted from his features. His thumb traced her cheekbone with impossible gentleness. "You're shaking," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "I don't understand what's happening." Her voice came out thin, reedy. "An hour ago I was property. Now you're telling people I'm going to be queen. You were never property." The vehemence in his voice made her breath catch. "You were lost. Stolen from me before I ever had the chance to find you. But I have you now, Alara, and I will never let anyone hurt you again." She should have argued, should have demanded explanations, made him justify every impossible word. But she was exhausted down to her bones, worn thin from years of fighting alone, and the warmth of his body against hers felt like coming home to a place she'd never known existed. "My sister," she managed. "Lily. She's back in the village. She's with neighbors, but they won't keep her forever. I need to get her. I need to make sure she's safe. We'll send for her tonight." Kale's hand settled on her lower back, a steady pressure that anchored her to reality. "She'll have her own rooms in the palace, tutors if she wants them. Everything you couldn't give her before." Tears pricked at Alara's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "Why? You don't even know me. You don't know if I'm cruel or kind, or if I snore, or if I hate the color blue. Why would you give us everything when you don't know anything?" He was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the crowd had begun to move again, conversations resuming in hushed, scandalized tones. But in their small bubble of space, it was just the two of them. "When I was 17, Kale finally said, "my father ordered the execution of an entire human village. Men, women, children. He said they were vermin, that their presence near our borders was an insult to wolf superiority." His jaw tightened. "I killed him for it, challenged him in front of the entire court and tore out his throat. And then I spent the next 300 years trying to build a kingdom worthy of the lives I couldn't save." Alara stared at him, seeing for the first time the weight he carried beneath the crown, the ghosts that haunted his amber eyes. "I've done terrible things," he continued, "necessary things. Things that kept me awake at night and made me wonder if I was any better than him. But through all of it, I held on to one hope, that somewhere in the world, there was a mate waiting for me. Someone who would see past the crown and the legend and the blood on my hands. Someone who would know me." His voice dropped. "And then you walked into this hall in a borrowed dress with a fake ring and fear in your eyes, and my wolf dropped to his knees inside me. Because you're not just my mate, Alara. You're my redemption." The tears she'd been fighting spilled over. She couldn't stop them. couldn't stop the sob that built in her chest and escaped as a broken sound that made Kale pull her closer, tucking her head beneath his chin, sheltering her from the watching crowd. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair. "I've got you now. You don't have to be strong anymore. Not alone. Never alone again." The weeks that followed were a blur of overwhelming change. True to his word, Kyle sent his fastest riders to retrieve Lily from the village. When the 12-year-old arrived at the palace, wide-eyed and trembling, Alara fell to her knees and held her sister so tightly she was afraid she might leave bruises of her own. Lily took to palace life with the adaptability of the young. She made friends with the kitchen staff, discovered a passion for horseback riding, and developed an unshakable adoration for Kale that manifested in following him around like a small, determined shadow. "Your sister asked me today if she could learn to fight," Kyle mentioned one evening as they walked through the palace gardens, his hand warm around hers. "She said she never wants to be helpless again, that she wants to be able to protect you the way you protected her." Alara's heart clenched. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I would hire the best weapons master in the 5 kingdoms to train her, and that if anyone ever tried to hurt either of you, I would destroy them so thoroughly that not even their names would survive." He paused, a slight smile tugging at his stern mouth. "She said that was acceptable." A laugh bubbled up from somewhere Ilara had forgotten existed. "She would." They stopped beside a fountain, moonlight silvering the water. It had been 3 weeks since the summit. 3 weeks of Kyle treating her like she was precious, giving her space when she needed it, holding her when the nightmares came. He hadn't pushed for anything physical beyond hand-holding and the occasional kiss to her forehead. He was waiting for her, letting her set the pace. "Kale." She turned to face him, her pulse quickening. The bond between them hummed with anticipation. "I want to kiss you." His eyes flared gold, his wolf rising to the surface, but his voice was carefully controlled. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The world ignited. The golden thread between them blazed to life, wrapping around them both, weaving through bone and blood and soul until she couldn't tell where she ended, and he began. His arms came around her, pulling her flush against his chest. His mouth moved over hers with a desperation that matched the hunger she hadn't known was consuming her from the inside out. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "Mate," he growled, the word vibrating through his chest. "Mate," she whispered back, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. 2 months later, Alara stood in the great hall of the palace, wearing a dress of silver and midnight blue that made her feel like starlight given form. The hall was packed with nobility from all 5 kingdoms, gathered to witness what hadn't happened in 300 years, the crowning of a queen. Kale stood beside her, resplendent in black and silver, his amber eyes never leaving her face. She'd asked him once why he looked at her like that. Like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe was real. "Because you are," he'd said simply. "Every time I look at you, I remember that the universe gave me something I never deserved. And I will spend every day of my very long life trying to be worthy of that gift." The ceremony was elaborate and ancient, full of oaths in the old tongue and rituals that made the bond between them pulse and strengthen. When the crown finally settled on her head, heavy with silver and sapphires, a roar went up from the crowd. But all Alara could see was Kyle, dropping to one knee before her, pressing his lips to her hand. "My queen," he murmured, and his voice cracked on the words. "My heart. My home." She pulled him to his feet and kissed him in front of everyone, and she didn't care about protocol or propriety or the scandalized gasps from the older nobles. She was done hiding, done being afraid, done pretending she didn't feel things as deeply and fiercely as the Wolf King who had claimed her. That night, in the chambers they now shared, Kale traced patterns on her bare shoulder as moonlight streamed through the windows. I never asked you, he said quietly, if this is what you wanted. A crown, a kingdom, responsibilities you never sought. Alara rolled to face him, cupping his scarred face in her hands. Do you know what I wanted? Before you found me? Tell me. I wanted one day where I wasn't afraid. One day where I didn't have to calculate how much bread cost versus how much medicine Lily might need. One day where I could just exist without bracing for impact. She traced the scar through his eyebrow. You gave me that. And then you gave me a sister who laughs again, and a purpose, and a partner who looks at me like I hung the stars. She kissed him softly. I don't care about crowns, Kale. I care about you. About the life we're building. About the kingdom we're going to make better together. He pulled her closer, burying his face in her neck. I love you, he breathed. I know I've never said it quite that plainly before, but I need you to hear it. I love you, Ilara, more than I've ever loved anything in 300 years of existence. I love you too. The words came easily now, no longer tangled up in fear and distrust. My king, my mate, my heart. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the world in white. Somewhere in the palace, Lily was probably convincing her weapons master to teach her one more move before bed. The kingdom stretched out around them, 5 territories united under their rule, finally at peace. And in the quiet of their chambers, the Alpha King and his unlikely queen held each other close, the golden bond between them singing with a joy that would echo through the ages. 300 years of waiting. 6 months of darkness under a cruel lord's thumb. And now, finally, a future that gleamed with possibility. Alara smiled against Kale's chest and let herself believe in happy endings. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts. And if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories.